improved our whole system. So I'll get into one of my more normal sections, which would be aimed at growers and how to use biological control and why it is so much different from just picking up a can of pesticide and tipping it in your sprayer. They can be a lot more fickle. They don't like being put out in the heat of the sun. If a lot of them live under the leaves, so in our January high intensity sun days, they would appreciate being put out in the morning or the evening. They would appreciate not being put out in torrential rain. But some people still think it's a good idea to do that because it helps it stick to the plant, not thinking it's actually drowning it on the plant. But and you're taking a product that's essentially maybe a jar of spiders or a jar of ladybirds and dispersing them through a crop to hunt out the pests. This hunting process takes time, so you're not going to come in the next day and expect everything to be dead. You're going to come in and pull out your hair and hope and pray that it's still working, and in a week's time or 2 weeks' time realize everything is fantastic and cherry. Here is our case study. This is why strawberries are starting to come off the dirty dozen globally and start to really ramp their way up through the Clean 15. This is a strawberry farm that we've been working with for a number of years, but has since, the owner has since retired and sold the land, so we've shifted our focus to another property. So a lot of strawberries are grown through Kumeu in West Auckland, which is traditionally a bit of a nightmare because there's so many thrips there, which is the main block for export because they make the fruit ugly. So this crop tends to get spider mites, thrips, aphids, caterpillars, and the odd whitefly. We introduced 3 species of predatory mite in there, 2 of them that live on the plant, 1 of them which I'll pass around, which lives in the ground. And the other things turned up themselves because he wasn't spraying. So 2 spotted mites. Has anyone dealt with these in the past? So
the ones that are there, they've got 2 little horns. That's a predator.
No, it's a pest.
Oh, okay.
So spider mites are the most herbaceous pest on earth. So they go on the most species of plants. They are the world's #1 threat to food security. Thankfully, there's quite a few easy ways and organic ways of getting rid of them. So they look like this. They are essentially a tiny spider. They've got 8 legs and a bulbous body. What differentiates mites from spiders is the lack of having a head. The head is the body. And this wee little traffic cone type guy over here is a predator of them, which will walk past every other thing that will fit in its mouth just to eat spider mites. So how it survives in the wild, only eating one thing, is quite baffling to most scientists. But through the course of the season, the spider mites started to increase as they do. The weather gets warmer, the air gets drier. There's a couple of releases of predatory mites, and the green line is the predatory mite population. You can see it doesn't look great for quite a while, until now, and then it ramps up. So when they go into the field, they go off, they come out of their bottle, and they start eating a few spider mites. Then they go off to find some others to lay some eggs so that their children will have food to thrive on, then move off to find more for themselves. So they're quite scarce for the first couple of weeks, and then their population just explodes because all of their offspring are now everywhere. So they actually produce more eggs and produce more females than spider mites, so they will actually outgrow the pest population when you manipulate the numbers.
How big is a 2-spotted mite compared to an aphid or something? How
So
big
a
are they?
2-spotted mite is about 0.7 millimeters long, so it's tiny compared to, usually if you say you had roses or something, you would notice speckling on the leaves, and in very severe cases, the leaf would become webbed with a really fine silky web. And at that point, you know it's really, really bad.
So what happens to the mite at the end of January when there's a heck of a lot of them and not very many spider mites?
So their population then starves off
Yes.
and drops down.
Yes.
So this is the ecosystem of the world.
Yeah.
Pest comes up, predator comes up, winter comes round, everything
Bang.
drops down,
Yes.
spring comes up, pest comes up, and the cycle keeps continuing. So there's a very complex little ecosystem out there. As a little fun fact, one of our wasps, which is in one of these jars here, lays its egg in an aphid, and then it grows to develop a wasp in there. There is another wasp that survives in the wild that can only lay its egg in an aphid that's been parasitized by this as a way of reducing the predatory and parasitic insects population in late summer,
Yes.
so that the pest has more of a chance come winter. So when you're doing cleanup sprays and things like that, you're actually messing with the ecosystem and getting everything out of balance. Aphids would be something that most people would call as a notorious pest. And in this 3-hectare strawberry farm, he did not have to do a single thing to control his aphids. The population started off low, hoverflies and lacewings, which I'll pass around and show later. Turned up, that's actually where we got our lacewings from. And they just kept the aphid population at a very, very low, not doing any damage, just sitting there, population for the whole season. Thrips, on the other hand, has been the bane of the strawberry's existence. So they end up bronzing it, so all the seeds pop out and they become an unmarketable strawberry. And the time they're most prevalent in the wild is New Zealand's golden opportunity to export strawberries. It is also the markets that take our strawberries have an extremely low acceptance for pesticides and extremely good ways of testing for it. So for a crop that is picked 7 days a week for 3 months, so everyone here will be used to getting strawberries before Christmas, and then after Christmas, all of a sudden there's all these pick your own fields. That's because they've made all their money exporting and selling to supermarkets, and now they're just stopping any inputs and don't want to pick it, and they'll start changing the crop over in sort of February. But from September until usually the 1st of January, places like Thailand and Taiwan will pay top dollar for New Zealand strawberries, because we are the only place in the world really producing them. Australia's got too hot, South America's too far away, all these sort of factors line up, and it's really, really good for us. After January 1st, it gets too hot in New Zealand, the strawberries become too small, and then other markets start their golden opportunity. So surprisingly, one of those big contenders with us is Egypt. Strawberries are meant to have a little bit of cold, so they can only grow them in their winter, which is our summer. So from that point on, actually Egypt starts to take over from us.
It's interesting.
Yeah, because it's strawberries actually need to go through a winter to set fruit, except for some of the more modified day neutral varieties. But yeah, it's bizarre thinking a country that's famous for having sand and a river and some pyramids would be producing this on such a global scale.
I've noticed this year there's been strawberries around, and I'm told that normally they would be sold onto the ships.
Yes, so
But because the ships haven't been coming in.
So one of the biggest issues facing our customers this year is some people have thrived, other people have dived. Some of our customers were very market orientated towards supplying cruise ships. Naturally, that wasn't so great in the last 14 months. Some of them nearly went under. They've started now supplying other outlets because shops that were already supplying, or growers that were already supplying direct to restaurants, already had their market heavily reduced with the number of restaurants that went under and the lack of people eating out. Then with the lack of flights, it was so much harder to get produce overseas. So a lot of our customers still managed to fit in that category of you're going to be the preferred supplier for us to export. So they were kind of okay, but that left a lot of other people thrown under the bus. So it's a lot of you might have noticed that the price of tomatoes through January and February was really, really low.
Cheap.
Yeah.
Give them
At
more.
that point in time, in any given summer, normally we're actually supplying Canada. But now you have to take several flights around the Pacific to get to Vancouver. It's too cost prohibitive, so Canadians are just choosing not to eat tomatoes. The other market we tend to supply then is Australia, when it's too hot to set fruit. But there's not many trans-Tasman flights, and their fruit, with all the interruptions they've had with COVID, meant they had an oversupplied market as well. On the other hand, our cut flower customers are booming because no one's able to get cheap cut flowers from Africa and India to New Zealand, and people are being a lot more compassionate and giving people flowers at this time. So they're on the up and up. So it's been a really changeable market. But yeah, in general, it has meant that a lot of people have had a worse year than they otherwise would have. But the general consensus amongst all the growers I speak to is it could have been worse. So we're all still hopeful. So,
Thrips.
thrips.
Are there different kinds, like
Yes.
on rhododendrons and the different ones on strawberries? Or?
So with any insects, like when you say thrips or aphids or mites, if you think of in terms of cats, you've got lions, pumas, cheetahs, leopards, the same thing applies. So certain species of thrips will be attracted to certain types of plants, others will be happy to go on several types of plants. In orchards you tend to get greenhouse thrips, which is a weird thing because orchards are not greenhouses, and greenhouses usually get onion thrips. But these sort of names are what people have called them, and they don't necessarily fit the crop that they're on. But generally speaking, in West Auckland on strawberries, or anywhere in Auckland, you will get around about 5 different species of thrips visiting your flowering plants. Some of them are easier to tell apart, like from a colour point of view, them being darker or lighter. The lighter thrips are onion thrips and the darker ones are greenhouse thrips. The flower thrips are only differentiated by a single hair that stands vertically on their back. A single hair. So you do need a compound microscope to identify or differentiate between Intonsa thrips and Western flower thrips and New Zealand flower thrips. Western flower thrips are considered on strawberries and a lot of crops as being the #1 evil insect out there. They have an extremely good insecticide resistance profile, and it doesn't take very many of them to actually start bronzing the fruit. We had a customer that had around about 40 onion thrips in a strawberry flower, and it still produced a good, saleable, beautiful fruit. If you had 10, or even sometimes in cases, if the plant was stressed, 5 Western flower thrips in there, it would be a horrible mess. So part of the work that's being done as well is getting growers a little bit up to speed on, is this a problem thrip, or is this a thrip that you shouldn't really care about? What's been quite interesting with our strawberry customers we've been working with for the last sort of 3 or 4 years is that their ag chem usage has dropped to almost none, or in some cases none. And they've started to notice a really big thrip in the last 2 years arriving, which we've subsequently identified as eating the smaller thrips.
Oh,
So,
Oh my
yeah. So it's, yeah. So
Is it
you,
native? Is it a native?
it is a native, yeah. Yeah. A lot of what we have to deal with here is natives, and then occasionally there's sort of introduced or naturalized pests. But a lot of our native insects, like beneficial thrips like this, if you Google a name, you might find a key somewhere, and then a research paper from the 1980s that said, oh, we found this once. But no one's really looked at, well, how could we exploit this? How could we benefit this? At the moment now, at least we've identified with our customers, try not kill that one. He's helping you. So,
Well, would you want to go out there and get them, wouldn't you, and breed them?
so a lot of things are unbreedable in captivity. They're just so hard, or uneconomic to do. So anything that's actually made it onto our website is something that we've overcome quite significant scientific challenges to get there. At the moment we have a whole lot of toys in our lab of different insects and pets, as we like to call them, that we're all trying to see how we can actually get them in amazing numbers. For an example, these cards which are used by tomato growers for their whitefly control, our biggest customers would be using 1 million wasps every week. So, yeah, we've got a lot of bugs to produce every day. But when it comes to the thrips, we tend to use some predatory mites. One of them's in here. If you shake it and wait for a few seconds, I'll pass that around, then you'll start to see them coming out. Otherwise, they'll be closed in around the media, trying to not cause attention. This is one of the, so in this plot we had, you can see a few different lines on the graph here. So we're trying different methods of more bugs, less bugs, feeding the bugs to get the thrips down. So we managed to keep the thrips population very mitigated compared to a lot of other farms, but the thrips kept building through the season. Then he applied one application of an insecticide called Sparta. It's quite hard on a lot of things, and some things it's friendly on. But if you can see in this plot here, so this is the thrips plot. So there was a lot of thrips, then he sprayed, and there was less thrips. Then a week later, there was a lot more thrips again. What was interesting is when he started out here, he just had 3 spots that had 2 spotted mites. Then he sprayed, and they were everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. So it turns out this insecticide not only kills the natural enemy of 2 spotted mites, but also gives a hormonal advancement to 2 spotted mites, which enables them to spread and breed faster. Just what we want to do. Thankfully, Sparta is one of the pseudo IPM friendly chemicals, so it doesn't kill things for too long. If it had been a synthetic pyrethroid, like what's commonly used in fly sprays, then every beneficial would be not establishing in there for around 3 months, maybe 4. But a week later, then the predators were everywhere again with them, and 2 weeks later, no one cared. He didn't put in any extra predators for the 2 spotted mites. It was a bit nerve-wracking, but he looked under the leaves and he said, oh, okay, you're coming, yeah, there's a few of you on here, and their population did what they did, exploded, took care of the population. His whole export season, 1 ag chem application, which is very different from the people that spray weekly. Spray weekly.
Would you have a list of your clients on your website? That would be a wonderful thing.
If you buy tomatoes in a fancy box,
Yes.
you can know they're fairly well spray free.
Is that bee kissed?
No. Certain ones of this, but like anything from NZ Hothouse, Southern Paprika, To be fair, with the strawberry market, when I've checked in my local supermarket what strawberries are arriving, 9 out of 10 times it's been my customers. And then it makes it really hard to choose, so I end up buying like 3 or 4 packs. I want to support them all. Big or small, they're still my customer.
There doesn't countdown.
Countdown, pack and save, yeah. So a lot of our customers tend to be quite big. We do have a lot of small customers, don't get me wrong, and a lot of them do farmers markets and things like that. But when it comes to mainstream food production, if it's grown in a glass house, it tends to be they have to kind of head this way because the pest pressure is so much more intense than outdoor cropping that they tend to try and be better in terms of controlling their pests. Yeah. The question always comes up, so how do I get this for free? Everyone always asks it. And to a point, you can get it for free. So you use the aptly named SNAP method, which was developed by the late Professor Steve Radden, who died of a stroke a few months ago, which is a huge loss for Lincoln University. He'd been very engaged in a lot of our industry projects and had a number of massive success stories behind it. So the trick is shelter, nectar, alternative food and pollen. Let there be bugs. So the proven plants that I've got very small for some reason is Phacelia, Alyssum and buckwheat. So if you get these in